Section 47 of A History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 4. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Eric Bjornson. A History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 4, by Henry Charles LEA. Book 8, Chapter 10, Spheres of Action, Political Activity. Part 2. There was evidently a purpose to use the Inquisition against the revolt of Germania Valencia, when a brief of October 11, 1520 was obtained from Leo X, granting to Cardinal Adrian faculties to proceed against all persons conspiring against public peace. No use seems to have been made of this, but the Valencia tribunal had an opportunity of making itself felt towards the ends of the disturbances. After Vicente Perez, the leader of the Agremandos, was killed in a tumult, March 3, 1522, a mysterious individual, known as El Encubierto, and variously described as a hermit from Castile and as a Jew from Gibraltar, presented himself as the avenger of Paris and became the spiritual chief of those who kept up the revolt in Jativa and Alira. He assumed to be a prophet and the envoy of God, which brought him under the ordinary jurisdiction of the Holy Office, and it made record of the heresies uttered by him in a sermon preached at Jativa, March 23rd. He organized a conspiracy in Valencia, but one of the accomplices, named Juan Martin, was betrayed and was seized by the Inquisition. El Encubierto was assassinated May 18th at Burjasot, and his head was cut off. The corpse was brought to Valencia, where the inquisitors had it dragged through the streets on the way to the tribunal. He was condemned as a heretic, the headless body was relaxed and burnt, and the head was set over one of the gateways. The action of the Inquisition had no influence on the course of affairs, but it manifests the readiness of the tribunal to assert itself as a political force. The fable that the Inquisition was invoked to accomplish the death of Don Carlos in 1568 has been sufficiently disproved to call for no attention here. There is probably, however, more truth in the statement that, about the same time, Philip II, in promotion of his designs on the remnants of Navarre, caused Inquisitor General Espinosa to collect testimony as to the notorious heresy of Jeanne d'Albret and her children, and formed with the guises a plot to abduct and deliver her to the tribunal of Saragossa. But the secret was not kept and the attempt was abandoned. Perhaps also we may class with political service the utilization by Philip of the Inquisition to supply him with galley slaves. The most prominent instance of the employment of the Inquisition in a matter of state was in the case of Antonio Perez. Its dramatic character attracted the attention of all Europe. The mystery underlying it has never been completely dispelled, and its resultant effect upon the institutions of Aragon invests it with an importance justifying examination in some detail. Antonio Perez was the brilliant and able favourite of Philip II, who in 1571 succeeded his patron, Ruy Gomez, Prince of Eboli, in acquiring his master's fullest confidence and became the most powerful subject in Spain. In 1573 the Venetian envoy Badero describes him as a most accomplished man, whose courtesy and attractive manners soothed the sensibilities of those provoked by the delays and penuriousness of the king, while his dexterity and ability promised soon to make him the principal minister. At the same time he was a man of pleasure, and the magnificence of his daily life was the admiration of his countrymen. He found his fate in the widow of his patron, the Princess of Eboli. Sprung from the noble house of Mendoza, she was proud, vindictive, and passionate, unflinching in the gratification of her desires and reckless as to the means. Whether Philip II had been her lover, and if so he was favoured or rejected, is a disputed question, which we need not discuss. It suffices that Perez, who had a devoted wife in Juana Coello, became enamoured of her mature charms and a slave to her imperious will. Don John of Austria had been sent to the Netherlands on the desperate task of pacifying them, and had been left without resources. Much to the king's displeasure, he sent, in July 1577, his secretary, Juan de Escobedo, to Madrid to urge the necessity of supplying funds. Escobedo was thoroughly honest, but rugged and uncourtly, and the vigour of his representations increased the royal ill-humour. Perez had for some time been secretly fanning the king's suspicions of his half-brother's designs, even to the point, it is said, of mistranslating cipher despatches. He represented Escobedo as an emissary sent to perfect Don Juan's plans, including a descent upon Santander and raising Castile in revolt. Convinced that Escobedo must be put out of the way, Philip ordered Perez to procure his death. If Perez felt any scruple as to this, it was removed by the fact that Escobedo, who was a retainer of the House of Mendoza, discovered the relations between the princess and the favorite. He remonstrated with freedom and threatened to inform the king. His doom was sealed, and after 2 ineffectual attempts at poison, bravos were hired who assassinated him in the street on the night of March 31st, 1578, and were rewarded with commissions in the army of Italy. Suspicion fell on Perez, whose fellow secretary and bitter enemy, Mateo Vasquez, reported the rumors to the king. The princess in her wrath threatened that Vasquez should share the fate of Escobedo. The court was divided into factions, which Philip vainly sought to pacify. He was bound in honor to protect his instrument, and repeatedly assured him that he was in no danger, but whether he was beginning to realize that he had been unpardonably deceived, or was prompted by jealousy over the relations between Perez and the princess, he at length was willing to sacrifice his secretary as an escape from a situation that was becoming impossible. Someone to replace him was required. Cardinal Granvelle, then living in retirement in Rome, was sent for. He arrived at the Escorial, July 29, 1579, and on the preceding night Perez and the princess were arrested in Madrid. She was carried to the castle of Pinto and was kept in strict confinement until February 1581, when she was allowed to return to her palace at Pastrana, when her extravagant freaks caused her affairs to be placed in charge of a commission, leading to her virtual imprisonment until her death, February 2, 1592. Perez, meanwhile, had undergone various vicissitudes of imprisonment more or less harsh. In May 1582, Philip ordered an investigation into the different branches of administration, directed principally against Perez. This resulted in showing that he had habitually sold the royal favour, and, in January 1585, he was condemned to 2 years' imprisonment in the castle of Turiguano, to 10 years' exile from the court, and to refund 12,224,739 maravedis, of which 7,371,098 went to the fisc and the balance to the heirs of Ruy Gomez, in restitution of presents given to him by the princess. The family of the murdered Escobedo had been vainly clamouring for justice. Philip had shrunk from being compromised in the affair, but now that Perez was thoroughly disgraced, if the documents proving his own complicity could be secured, Perez could safely be sacrificed to justice. His wife, Juana Coelho, was imprisoned and threatened with starvation unless she would surrender his papers. She resisted heroically until a note from Perez, which he says was written with his blood, permitted her to do so, but he had, with his usual foresight, abstracted from them in advance and placed in safety what he deemed necessary for his justification. In the summer of 1585, Philip permitted the Escobedo kindred to commence the prosecution. Antonio Enriquez, the page of Perez, who had arranged the assassination, gave full testimony, but the conteste, or corroboration by another witness, was lacking. The affair dragged on until September 28, 1589, Pedro Escobedo, son of the victim, abandoned it for the sum of 20,000 ducats and pardoned his father's murderers. Philip's rancor, however, had deepened with time, and the prosecution was continued. Perez was tortured February 22, 1590. At the 8th turn of the Cordeles, his resolution gave way. He confessed the crime at the royal command and stated the reasons which had moved the king to order the murder. Soon after this he took to his bed and was reported to be dangerously sick. His wife, early in April, was admitted to attend him, and on the 20th, by a side door, of which he had procured a false key and from which the bolts had been removed, he escaped at night. Friends with horses were in waiting, and he took the road to Aragon. He was of Aragonese descent, so that he could claim the fueros and the court of the Justicia, which, as we have seen, sat in judgment between the sovereign and his subjects. Aragon at the moment was especially excited in defence of its privileges, among which was the claim that none but an Aragonese could serve as viceroy. Philip was contesting this, and had sent the Count of Almenara to conduit a suit on the question before the court of the Justicia. Almenara earned general ill will by assuming superiority over all the local officials. The Count of Sastago, then viceroy, resisted his pretensions and was removed and replaced by Andres Jimeno, Bishop of Teruel, a timid and irresolute man. So great became Almenara's unpopularity that a nearly successful attempt was made to burn at night the house which he occupied. There was a spirit of turbulence abroad, peculiarly favourable to Perez, who came to claim the protection of the fueros as a faithful servant, whom his king was endeavouring to destroy in reward of his fidelity. Philip's wrath was boundless. His first impulse was to wreak vengeance on the helpless wife and children, whom were thrown into prison, where they lay for 9 years until after their persecutor had gone to his last account. Orders were at once despatched to seize the fugitive, dead or alive, before he could cross the Ebro, and so swift were the pursuers that they reached Calatayud, where he made his first halt only 10 hours after him. He threw himself into the Dominican convent for asylum, while his faithful friend Gil de Mesa, who had accompanied him, hurried forward to Saragossa and claimed for him the manifestacion, which secured for him the jurisdiction of the judicia. Alonso Celdran, lieutenant of the governor, rushed to Calatayud, after some difficulty forcibly removed Perez from the convent, but the veguero of the justicia came with letters of manifestation and obliged him to surrender his prey. Nobles and gentlemen flocked to the Calatayud, and Perez was conducted to Saragossa in a veritable triumphal procession, where he was received by the populace as though he were a king, and was safely lodged in the Carcel de los Manifestados. Then commenced the curious spectacle of a duel to the death between the disgraced fugitive and the whole power of the greatest monarch of Christendom, giving us an enlarged respect for the fueros of Aragon, to see that the monarch was helpless until he invoked the overriding powers of the Inquisition, under the pretext that his thirst for vengeance was a matter of faith. End of section 47.